Hello, my name is Jean Cropper, and I'm an artist, a designer, a paper engineer, and I lead workshops in meditative drawing. I'm based in Sydney, Australia. As a creative, I'm fascinated by the many ways we can tell stories, the ways we can create characters, and how we can help people make sense of life and its major events that change, and how we can heal. And today I'm talking to Kei Yasugi. I'm interested in the making of puppets themselves and what is unique about telling stories in this way. Kei Yasugi is a puppeteer, a puppet maker, and teacher. She trained at London School of Puppetry in the UK. She runs workshops and performs shows with Pupperoos, focusing on education and children's projects. She also does puppet commissions for film, television, and theater through the company Digital Seagull. She works in a variety of styles of puppetry, including shadow theater, rod puppetry, hand glove puppets, and marionettes or string puppets. Hello, Kei.
Hi, Jean. Nice to see you. Thank you so much for having me on your program.
Thank you. Yes, thanks for being here. Where are you in the world?
I am also in Sydney, Australia, and to just acknowledge the Aboriginal country that I'm on, I'm in Gadigal country.
Wonderful. Yep, I'm on Wangal. Yes. Okay. How did you become interested in puppetry? What drew you to it?
I must have seen it as a child, and it's one of those things where you're not quite sure if the puppet is real or if it is not real. And you can see the operator there, but then there's this thing that has a life of its own, and you become very invested in it. And so I think I'm drawn to how you get to play with an object and really delight people. There's nothing I found more joyful than puppetry, even though puppetry can take you to some pretty dark places. But all in all, the work that I do is really joyful work. And so I think I love that with puppetry, you can be anyone and you can really do anything. And it gives you the capacity to be a writer, a director, a maker, a performer, and a choreographer, or work with those people to help you to put this story of yours into the world.
Yes.
And so, yeah, that's kind of how I became interested in, I suppose.
Thank you. Yes. So, yeah, do you have any memories of particular puppet shows that you saw as a child? Or did you see puppet shows as a child?
I didn't see that many puppet shows when I was in Japan. I was born in Japan. I left when I was 3. The earliest memory that I have is seeing a puppet on television and actually being terrified. It was probably a Japanese version of Pinocchio. And I remember seeing this wooden figure with its nose growing. And I thought, that was the scariest thing I've ever seen.
Yes. Yeah.
And probably a good lesson for a child not to lie. But I just thought there was something very otherworldly about it. And then when I moved to Australia, I think the puppet shows I saw were probably at school. There was also a wonderful shop called the Puppet Cottage or the Puppet Shop, The Rocks. It's not there anymore, which is a real shame. But they used to have puppet shows every weekend. And Sydney Puppet Theatre used to perform there. And I still remember seeing their wonderful marionette shows. And it's just a really funny, delightful thing that life works out, that I've worked with Sue and Steve from Sydney Puppet Theatre since. So I was a fan, I saw them as children, and then last year I worked with them. And I continue to work with them on different projects from now and then. And they're different.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating that you can play so many different creative roles within puppetry. That would be one of the things that makes it unique.
Yeah. Yeah, it is it's I don't know really any other art form, and this may be just my own ignorance rather than just this is what it is.
No, go for it. That's all right. Yeah.
I don't really know very many other art forms, or you really can, if you want to, if you have the capacity, the skill, and the motivation to, you can do everything. You can make this play and put it on and do all the characters and all the voices and the music. When you see a solo performer do that, it's like watching a conductor and their orchestra in one person, and the stage crew, and it's the most wondrous thing, this microcosm of a world that they have made. But then you also see giant productions, arena shows, where you see the power of having lots of people come together to create something that can be collectively experienced and enjoyed by many.
Yes.
There's a very big spectrum that can.
Yes. Okay. What are some of the unique abilities of puppetry in telling stories?
The unique ability, I think one of the unique things about puppets is they're not alive. And so they, for many, they are a surrogate. This is a concept that I studied at London School of Puppetry, as you mentioned, and my teacher, Caroline Astelbert, she actually wrote this book. I'll hold it up. It's called I Am the Story, The Art of Puppetry in Education and Therapy. And in it, she talks about the puppet as a surrogate. And it is the vessel that will hold whatever is in the operator, the performer, or the beholder. Sometimes it's both. It's a co-creation as you're watching something. Hopes and dreams, terrors and fears. It can enact and act out things that you could not possibly do or even tell. Sometimes people can't even speak of the things that they have felt or seen or desired or longed for, that they can do with a puppet. It can talk. It can give voice to the voiceless.
Yes.
It can represent groups of people who often do not have a voice. But it can also be powerful in voicelessness and be a symbol of control. You often see it in politics, or places where you see an injustice where one entity or being or group of people are being controlled by another, and puppetry is a very strong symbol for that. I have a friend who struggles with mental health issues, and I remember her telling me that when she operated a puppet, particularly a marionette, where you actually hold, it's called the control. When you hold the control of a puppet, it's so powerful to have control of something else. And so that's something that I don't really know many other art forms allow a person to do. You don't have to necessarily operate a puppet to enjoy the benefits of it, but there is something particularly powerful about operating puppets, I think.
Okay, yeah, I could see how giving voice to longings and dreams and feelings and doing things that are symbolic, or having characters that are symbols or representative of something, that could be a very powerful way to tell difficult stories or painful stories, or to be able to watch stories in a format that other people could stand to watch or enjoy watching. Well, as we were talking before we started recording, talking about war, that wouldn't be something you could watch in real life, and war movies are a whole different thing. But that to be able to tackle some of those painful issues, but in a way that's less painful to watch, allows you to think about the stories in different ways.
Well, when you mentioned that, I have a book here. It's the Hansbrin Puppet Company, and they are the company that are responsible for Warhorse, which is one of my all-time favorite shows. And it's when I say that out loud, like I've seen it over 11 times, because I ended up having being involved in it and running workshops for them when they came to Australia. And I have a dear friend, Kayla Cabanas, who was a performer in it. So that's why I got to see it so many times. But to think one of my favorite shows of all time is A War Story, is when I think about it, that's not me.
Yes.
I'm not. I find war devastating, but it's how war is experienced through a horse and through a creature who does not take sides. In fact, it changes sides because he gets captured and has to be a war for the other side for a time, and it's a reunion story between the horse and its owner. And so in that way, it's a bit of a love story. And you say that watching puppetry can be less painful, and I agree to a point. It's still very painful when you see a puppet die on stage. And I heard someone say actors struggle to die. Oh, actually, it's Handspring Puppet Company who said that. Actors struggle to die, puppets struggle to live. And you see these creatures struggling to survive and live. And then when you see a creature die on stage and when the operators physically leave the animal and turn around, it's one of the most haunting images. And you see, wow, that's really gone. That's really dead. And it's harrowing. And I think at the start of the show, when you see Joey, the horse, the main character, as a foal, and there's this baby, and you get very invested very quickly.
Yes.
I think it's often love at first sight for most people in puppets, and then you see it grow up and it transitions into this horse and full gallop. It's so beautifully done, and then you see it go off the war, and you're just hoping that it'll survive.
Yes.
And so I don't think, and I still haven't been able to see the live action film of it. I don't think I will be able to, but something about seeing it as a show with puppets where you know that puppet's not real and there are people bringing it to life. It's a symbol. It's just that little bit of distance that you need in order to process something really hard.
Yes.
Like on a completely different note, a few years ago now, I was asked to make puppets for a documentary about the herpes virus of all things.
Yeah.
And it's taboo and people don't want to talk about it. But Jean, it affects 1 in 8, or it did back in
Yes. Yeah.
more now. But their concept was similar to I think it's called Creature Comforts with Aardman. That was a couple decades ago, where they would take stop motion plasticine figures and have real people's voices talking, but then have zoo animals, talking in for them. And that concept was used for this, where they interviewed people who have had the herpes virus, who still have it, talking about their experiences, but to make them anonymous.
Yes.
But also make the topic just a bit more lighthearted and palatable and just a bit more entertaining, something that people will want to watch.
Yes.
They asked me to make puppets and that kind of Muppet style Avenue Q kind of puppet without breaching copyright. So, so that's what we did. And these puppets interacted with real people and had real scenes. It's, I think, the only time that I've ever had to do a scene where a guy was topless from here to here and a puppet had to do this on his torso. And it was like, well, I would never in a million years be cast as an actor to be in a scene with someone else who was topless from here to here, didn't do that on his chest. But you were telling that person's story and doing it through a puppet and using humor. It was very funny. And I think that's another key with puppets, is they can be very, very funny. And that's so essential and necessary when you are dealing with hard things and hard topics.
Yes.
And sort of just taking the edge off a bit. and giving people a bit of a break. Like even with Warhorse, there was a goose in the show. Nothing really to do with the show, didn't progress the story, but it was the much needed comic relief. And my friend Kayla, she not only operated one of the horses, but she was also the goose. And I think it gave her a break as well, where she had to do some really intense things with the horse and vocalize its neighing and bring, take it to war. But then she had this other bit where it was a bit like clowning, and people needed the goose. It's always often the people's favorite character in that show. So,
yeah. I mean, if you can bring humor into something that's serious, I think it allows people to go much deeper into the serious stuff, and also can bring you back to life in a different way, and then go back into the deep stuff. And so that's a real art to do. That's very precious. Yeah. Okay. Lovely.
They do say laughter is the best medicine. So
yes.
I think laughter is a very good medicine.
Yes. Yeah.
I think medicine is very important. So yeah.
Yeah. And how does your own history or cultural background inform your work?
So I am half Japanese, half Korean. My mother is Korean and my father is Japanese. Very interesting marriage in terms of it. It was like the Greeks and the Turks getting together. It was very, very difficult at the time, but it's worked out. And in terms of my own cultural heritage going into my work, it's really not only until recently that that's happened. So I have a show, and it's about women divers called Haenyeo, and they are from Jeju Island in South Korea. And it's this magazine that I saw at the Korean Cultural Center back at the end of 2017. I walked into their library, and it's in the city, by the way, wonderful place to visit if you're in Sydney. And this was just in their library, and I thought it was the most evocative image, and I had no idea what it was. And I picked it up, and I saw these women divers who, one thing I noticed that they're older. I didn't see young women. They were older women in their 60s and 70s. And some as old as 90, and they're sea farmers, one of the very first sustainable sea farmers around the world, one of the only matriarchal communities in the world, and they're also dying out, which is tragic, but also it's just so many art forms are being replaced by modern technology and modern ways of doing things. But I thought there's just something about them that I really was drawn to telling their story. Yes. It's not something that I sought out, but then I ended up making a story about them. And so this is my little diver puppet.
Oh, yes. Yep.
So she is. And
so just tell us about the materials there for a moment.
Okay. So I crochet. It's another thing that I wanted to incorporate. It's about women's stories and celebrating crafts that are often done by women. So her face has been crocheted. Yes. Her mask is a takeaway container. Yeah. Her body and her head have styrofoam. And it's funny because the buoys that the divers float on have styrofoam inside. But this one, and these float up in
is that the net that what they catch in or what they harvest in?
Yes.
And it floats at the top as a storage.
And they catch seashells, different kind of conchs, abalone, and sea urchins and things like that. So they dive down. They also farm kelp and things like that. So let me just set her up. So she needs to have a dive.
Sure. Yeah.
And then she can.
Oh, lovely! Oh, that's delightful. Yeah.
And it's a show that I do with my mother. So she goes, I can make a swim all day. And so it's basically a story about passing down traditions, which when I thought about it, I realized I really needed to tell the story with my mother. She accompanied me to Jeju Island on a research trip. I very gratefully got funding from the Seaborn, Broughton and Walford Foundation, SB&W Foundation, to go and research these women divers. I had a diving lesson with them. I felt extremely unfit. They are amazing. They free dive without any breathing apparatus, and they just dive for these seashells, and they can hold their breath for up to 2 minutes. They're just the most tough women I had ever met, and I was fascinated. They're so tough and so vulnerable and fragile at the same time because of their industry dying out, and their whole way of life is disappearing, and they also are aging. And the water gets very cold, and yet it is something that they are compelled to do. So I was fascinated to tell their story. This is a turtle in the show. So also crocheted. I bought this crochet yarn from Korea. It's actually plastic yarn. This is a turtle that gets stuck in a plastic bag during the show, and the Henyo diver comes and she rescues the turtle from the plastic bag. There's a little air pump. There's you might be familiar with around Christmas time, you might see, or other times where you see these children's hats with these little arms sticking out, and you can hold onto that and it like makes their arms go up and down. They're called flippies hats. So that's where that came from.
Yeah, okay.
And it means that it can swim, across the sea and things like that. And so this was based on a folk tale of a Henyo diver who helps a turtle, and the turtle takes her to the Dragon King, and she gets a piece of coral that heals people of diseases. And so I was inspired by that story, and instead of the Dragon King, she goes to the bottom of the sea and finds a pearl, a glowing pearl, and shows it to her granddaughter, who at the start of the show is not at all interested in diving, doesn't want to go into the water, is not interested in what she does. And at the end, when she sees this pearl and is bathed in the light, afterwards she goes swimming with her grandmother. And the ending is open to interpretation. It doesn't mean she'll necessarily keep it going, because it's a whole industry that's going up, but it's more about legacy and about continuing to tell her story. So in terms of my cultural heritage, that's one of the first shows that I have done that is telling a story from my culture, which, when I think about it, is also hard to say. I don't know how to articulate it, but being half Korean, half Japanese, but having lived in Australia since I was 3, I'm more Australian in many ways than Korean and Japanese. And so my culture, there's something about being born in one place but growing up in another and finding where you belong. Yes. And I think I was drawn to telling their story in order to learn a bit more about my culture. And I don't speak Korean. I know all the foods, but I'm not fluent in it. And so my mother is not a puppeteer, but she is the cultural custodian of the show. And so she's there for the language and the keeper of the culture. And together we tell this story. So I learn from her, and she's learned from, she performs in the show.
Yeah. That makes sense to me. I can understand. And I was born in the United States, but also grew up in Scotland and Ireland and moved to Australia as an adult. So I certainly understand the question of, what of me is a Scot? What of me is American? What of me is Australian? Why does it feel right to live here in this particular part of the world? and that you are all of that, and your stories then come from all of that, but you have a unique perspective because of the different places you've lived or come from. Mm. And the world does look very different from different parts of the world, different climates. And I went to university in Vermont, right near the Canadian border, and it would be 30 below Fahrenheit every night for 3 weeks in the winter, frigid cold. And that's such a different life than living in Sydney. So I understand that, stories come from lots of different places, and we're all of that together. So
it really is. I'm also a teacher. I teach. It's called EALD, English as an Additional Language or Dialect. And at the school I teach at, there's quite a few Mongolian students. And I was struck that Korean people, Japanese people have Mongolian ancestry, and so these children look like me and I look like them. And for a lot of these children who came without any English, we tried to connect through stories. And we found that there's actually a story which loosely translates to the bread boy, and it's the gingerbread man. But in Mongolia, it's a ball of dough that runs away, and is and a rabbit wants to eat it, and a wolf wants to eat it, and a bear. But then it's the fox that eats it in the end. And it was interesting that because of its proximity to Russia, their stories are sometimes have similarities, because in Russia it's the gingerbread boy. So it was just fascinating to have connection through stories with people from all over the world, even when you don't have the language. Yes. And I think that's another thing about puppetry, is it's a visual art form. There can be a lot of text with it. One of the puppeteers I admire greatly is Ronnie Burkett, and he's from Canada, and his plays for adults are full of words. He writes the scripts, and but on the whole, it's very, very visual, and so it can connect on levels that sometimes language cannot, I think.
I think growing up, most of the puppet shows I saw were for children, but are there, in different countries, is puppetry also more telling stories for adults or to adults?
Yes. Puppetry in general hasn't necessarily been for children. Apparently one of the oldest forms of puppetry back in, ancient Greece or ancient Rome, when the people of the temple would have this oracle head on a string, and when people ask a question, they would pull yes or no, and Punch and Judy would be for the people of the street, and would be extremely subversive, and would almost be like, I guess, the Shakespeare of the time, where it would be multi-layered and actually be highly political, but was able to get away with it because it was under the guise of something for children. And it can be very subversive that way.
I like that. I like that. Yeah.
And I was looking up, so because have Japanese heritage, there's bunraku puppetry, which is traditionally known as ningyo joruri. And bunraku is a tradition that's hundreds and hundreds of years old. And there was a playwright, Chikamatsu, and he wrote a play, and hopefully I'm pronouncing this right, Sonezaki Shinju. It's the double suicide in the garden of Sonezaki Temple. And it was about two lovers who couldn't be together in their life. So they end up taking their lives together. And it ended up being a play that was banned because people would try and do the same thing. And that was not for children. It was a play that was, funny enough, very popular at the time because it was one of the only stories and art forms of the time that really listened to people's problems. And in Japanese society, that pull between social obligation and duty, but then your own passion and your own longing, which is often unfulfilled, and not being able to marry the two, and being, some people being driven mad by it. And so puppetry hasn't always been for children and still isn't necessarily for children. And I'm really drawn to stories that are for families because then it can be multi-layered and can speak to different people at different times in their life.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And how do you train for being a puppeteer? And are there puppetry schools in different countries? Where does one train?
That is a good question. That question keeps evolving. I trained at London School of Puppetry. And so when I finished university, did my teaching degree at Sydney Uni, I got a fellowship to train at London School of Puppetry. And I was there for a bit over a year. That kind of course doesn't exist anymore. There is the Curious School of Puppetry in the UK. And that, as far as I know, is one of the best courses that can take someone intensively through. I think it's about a 10-week course, but it's in London and that's far. And so more and more people are gravitating towards online learning, which is limited, but in some ways better than nothing. Like, there are some things that you can learn really well. Bernd Ogrodnik from Iceland, he runs puppetry school online that started during the pandemic because he couldn't travel. And now that's how he makes most of his living. And he's a wonderful puppeteer and such a gifted maker.
Just say his name again.
Bernd Ogrodnik. Bernd Ogrodnik.
Okay.
How do I spell that?
We can put names in the resources. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
And then for people who are more interested in film and television style puppetry, again, making, there's the Stan Winston School of Character Arts. That's only online. So you can, those are the people responsible for like Jurassic Park and,
okay.
So you can learn some really specific, very complicated, making skills, starting at the base and working your way up. So there are things. I'm part of UNIMA Australia. That's the T-shirt that I'm wearing at the moment. And I'll stand up so you can see.
Yes. UNIMA.
UNIMA Australia. It is an international organization, and it connects puppeteers all around the world. And we're actually having a panel discussion later in the year specifically about puppetry training, because there used to be puppetry training at the VCA, Victorian College of the Arts, in Melbourne, and it was a postgraduate course where people could learn puppetry.
Yes.
But funding was cut. That course is no more. There is, as far as I know, the only official course in Australia is in Western Australia through WAPA, WAAPA, so the Western Australian, Western Australian Academy of Performing Arts. Maybe that's okay. I will look that up. I'll send you the link.
That's fine. Yep. Okay.
They are linked with Spare Parts Puppet Theatre.
Okay.
And so they train graduates from there to train in puppetry. And there are courses available here and there. There's the Imaginata Australian Puppet Centre. It's an hour-and-a-half drive down in the Southern Highlands from Sydney. And so that's where Steve Coop and Sue Wallace from Sydney Puppet Theatre, they run that, and sometimes they do workshops there. So Yeah, UNIMA, we also run workshops online and art talks. So that's how we've been doing things. And books, lots and lots of books.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. And as an artist, and I've worked with paper and masks and that sort of thing. And I'm intrigued with the making of the puppets themselves. You mentioned crochet, and it looks like there's many different materials that can be used in puppets. Can you tell us about the marionette beside you, and then perhaps
this is a marionette that I carved at the Puppets in Prague School in the Czech Republic. So it's a Czech style marionette, and she is made out of lime wood. So she is tiny, but boy, is she heavy. So she has strings and her arms can move, and she's on a rocker. So you can see that she can move up. She's a storytelling puppet, so she has fairy tale painted on her head. So that's her. There's actually another marionette I've got over there called Scooter Grandpa, so I'll bring him over as well, and I'll bring over Normie too.
So it sounds like you've learned skills in different materials to create different characters of puppets.
Yes. Well, this one is in wood, and I had to learn wood carving. Yes. And so I'll just bring over.
Sure.
Scooter Grandpa. Okay, so this one, again, this is a puppet that I made for when I was at puppetry school. And so here he is. And his head is paper mache, and usually he's walking on a platform of some sort, but this will have to do for today.
Sure. Yeah.
And and he can look around.
Yes, I can see how each puppet has different capacities for movement, and that I suppose choosing that kind of movement is part of what really animates and gives them character.
Yeah. And one thing that I was told is if you can do it any other way, don't do it with a puppet. Only do it with a puppet if that's the best way to serve the story. The story has to come first. And so with Scooter Grandpa, it was the story of an old man who was looking for a star, and he's on his scooter. He's Italian. It's hot. He doesn't have a shirt on, and he finds a star, and he has to climb up and reach it. And so, with the way I look like, I can't tell that story myself. I didn't want to do it as an animation. I wanted to show the struggle of this little old man trying to find his star. And then once he touches the star, then he dances and he can fly and he can do all these things that a person cannot. And so, yeah, that's him. And I had to learn paper mache and carving and sewing. I had to sew his trousers. And so, yeah, the materials change with each build. So this one is Normie. He is a mascot for UNIMA, and he is named after Norman Hetherington, who was Mr. Squiggle, and he was also the very first president of UNIMA Australia back in 1970 when it started. So Normie, yeah, we're just going to say hello to some people on the internet. Okay. And so Normie also has that air pump. So can only do one thing. Normie, do you like podcasts? Yes.
Yeah, wonderful. Yes.
Do you like cookies? And Normie is hand sewn out of faux fur, has a wooden nose and some bead eyes and things like that. So yeah, it just all depends on the character.
Yes, you've shown us quite a few different materials, puppets made in different ways from different materials, and I'm starting to understand how each of those has different ways of moving and different things they can do and express, which is amazing. Yeah.
There's something quite powerful also about the materials itself. I was in Zoom social yesterday through UNIMA, and we were talking, it was a maker's social, and we're talking about different materials. And I didn't even know that people use Kevlar as a form of stringing for certain kinds of puppets for mechanisms. And they were saying Kevlar has been used also for the skins of like larger puppets. And I said, isn't that the same material as bulletproof vest? And they said, it sure is. It has to withstand a lot of stress and wear and tear and things like that. So you can actually have bulletproof puppets.
Yes, I love that. Yes, yeah. Now, you did a project on ABC's Play School. Can you tell us a bit about that?
So quite a few years ago, I was contacted by Play School who wanted to film me working with some puppets with children. And at the time, I was just about to go to, I think it was either the Tarrangower Puppet Festival or the Malden Puppet Carnival. It was both held in Tarrangower, which is a beautiful, picturesque postcard town in rural Victoria. Mm-hmm. And so I said, I am leaving Sydney, but if you want to come along, you can not only film me, but a whole bunch of other puppeteers. And they thought that was marvelous. So they came and they filmed the festival. They filmed me doing a workshop with children. And that, I have to say, Jean, filming for television is very different to doing it in real life. And having to tell, they had to film it at various angles, and I had to put something together for a child and then break it apart so that they can do it again, and seeing the child get up. So I was like, it's okay, it's the television. But what they came up with was really lovely, and I think it's still on repeat to this day. There's a smiley, much younger, more youthful version of myself somewhere on ABC sure. Every now and then at that. So that was Play School. Yeah.
Does puppetry allow you to tell stories from an unusual point of view?
Oh, yes. Unusual point of view. We've talked about Warhorse, so telling a story from the point of view of a horse.
Absolutely. Yeah, the view of a horse. Yeah.
And an unusual point of view. I'm trying to think of the name of the show. I cannot think of the name of the show, but I'll send it to you. There's a show that I was astounded by because it's a marionette made of ice. And it melts as the show goes on. And so from the beginning that this character is not going to make it. And I was so moved by that. There was a friend of mine who I studied with at London School of Puppetry, Kat Schumacher, and she made a show called Best Before March 15th, and it was about Caesar. Julius Caesar is a steak. He's a red T-bone steak, and the Senate are knives and forks. And Brutus
interesting.
Is the carving knife. And so I think puppetry can tell stories from an interesting point of view, but also tell a story you already know in a way that you hadn't seen it before.
Oh, I like that. Yes, I like that a lot.
And so I think we talked a bit before about going into hard things and telling hard stories. And sometimes I think when someone's gone through something really difficult or really traumatic, going at it from a different angle or in a different way can help that person to approach that story in a new way that may be less scary.
Yes.
And to externalize it in a way that helps them to process it.
Yes. That makes a lot of sense. I can certainly understand. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Let's see. Is there anything else you'd like to add? Any other?
I do. I guess it's more of a couple of recommendations.
Sure.
I just saw Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio on Netflix. What a stunning piece of work. I think it took him like a decade to make. And from concept to finish. And it's stop motion animated puppets. And again, what a way to approach a story that you think you know that's told from a completely different point of view. Fascism's in it, Mussolini's in it, and there's a lot of grief and loss, which really takes you by surprise. But it's also a really entertaining movie that can be watched by families. And it can be watched by little children all the way up to adults. And I think it just shows the power of puppets. And, when it talks about fascism and control, you can see why they would choose Pinocchio as this puppet who has no strings and cannot be controlled. And so it's something that I was very moved by. And if anyone is interested in puppetry or meeting puppeteers, so I mentioned UNIMA Australia, and we have membership is open to anyone around the world. And so we have a website, unima.org.au. I can send you the link. And there's also a podcast. It's called Talking Sock. Very dear friend of mine, Alex Joy from One Orange Sock Productions. He has a wonderful podcast where he interviews many different puppetry practitioners. Most of them are from Australia and some from abroad as well. So if you're interested in hearing more stories from puppeteers, Talking Sock is another great place to go.
Great. Well, thank you, Kei Yasugi. Thanks very much.
Thanks so much, Jean.